Facebook. If I can't, then I will just carry on and we won't spend a lot of time on that. So since we do have Absent Man, um, let's see. All right, I can't change that, so it's just gonna have to be that. So this is the proof copy. That's why this little thing is going through the middle here. And it's so that we can fix all the little formatting issues. If you've ever done anything in KDP, you know that KDP is a challenge. But some of the AI stuff, I have to be honest, and the things that you can do in the actual AI editing software, as far as the things you do to prepare it for KDP, which is Kindle Publishing, which is essentially anything if it's paperback or Kindle. I apologize. Essentially, you got to deal with KDP. So you're importing an EPUB publication, but the good news is that the formatting is done in another program. So I do it in a program called Atticus, which allows me to see the place where it's been written and imported. But then when I do my changes, whether you're doing a subhead or whatever you're doing, I can just click on the little formatting button and boom, there it is. So that's helpful. So I was going to read something from the book. I was going to read the introduction and then talk about it. This stuff goes live on Amazon. You can pre-order it now, of course. And well, let me read the endorsements as well, because there's people who think it's pretty good already. So I'm going to read the endorsements and then I will read the introduction to it and I'll just talk about it briefly. So this is Kathy Walters. Dr. Scott helps many people put back their picture of the Father heart of God. Dr. Scott restores the vision of the Father that the enemy has tried to destroy. But we know the devil is a liar. This is Margie Mormon. Scott loves stories and tells them well. I've heard many. But The Absent Man isn't just another story. It's raw, real, and rooted in truth with a capital T. It carries the weight of trauma, the testing of faith, and the revelation of hope and healing. This book is rich in insight and saturated with freedom. If you're seeking depth, clarity, and truth that transform, this is a must read. This book was a fun project for me from the standpoint of it became a challenge to do the entire book in a month. And it was literally 30 days. And it ended on my wife's birthday. I was done. Midnight, like right before midnight, I had uploaded, and so technically it was done. All right, so this is Dr. Ricky Porter. In a world where 1 in 4 children live without a father, the absent man offers more than insight, it offers healing. Dr. Scott Infante exposes the wound of fatherlessness with raw honesty and leads us to the heart of the Father who restores. This isn't just a book, it's a prophetic call to wholeness, identity, and legacy. The Audible book will come out a few days later. It takes them a little bit more time after you record it and submit it to them, and they say, yes, you can sell it on our platform. It takes them more time to um, put it through all the quality checks. So, you know, part of the project was, and the reason I wanted it was because I got to play with a bunch of AI tools. I always like to clarify and say the writing and the language is all me. But it did do the editing for me. So for example, when you I would record the chapters in an AI program that would create a transcript, and then I would airdrop that transcript to my Mac. And so it changed the way I still did a lot of writing on a keyboard, um, but it did change the way of getting the book out, so to speak, because the topic in terms of the Father, heart of God, etc., is such significant, part of who I am as a person and what I've been doing for many years. And so it's not something that is foreign to me at all. So doesn't mean that I know everything there is about it, and it didn't mean that I didn't do research or interview people or anything like that. But what it meant was it wasn't gonna be the biggest stretch to write. It was a matter of just doing it. And so when I with high school kids, one of the things that I would tell them when we would do creative writing assignments that were attached to a particular genre of literature that we were studying, um, they would have to, do these two-page, um, you know, short stories based on whatever thing we just finished. So if we just finished Gothic fiction, they had to write a Gothic one. Yes, they all would like to put in there. I have discovered Chat GPT back then. When I would have like 6 or 7 papers turned in, and they all involve this mysterious Ravenwood Manor. And I was like, huh, as smart as I am, right? I'm like, that's very interesting that everybody and, several students in the class, all in their collective consciousness, in their own doing their own workness, they all conceived this idea that their Gothic story was going to take place in the Ravenwood Manor. So, I basically told them that anybody that had the Ravenwood Manor in their story had to redo their paper, but thank you very much. And I also reminded them, guys, you've been writing short answers, you've been writing paragraphs, you've been doing things that involve writing in this class. Do you not think that I could tell the difference between a Chat GPT short story where you just said, I need a 2-page short story that's Gothic, Gothic fiction, and you just printed that out and handed it to me? You don't really think I knew the difference. Like, of course, they all kind of knew that I knew, but they were hoping that I knew but didn't care. You know what I mean? Which wasn't the case. So, anyway, it's changed a lot of the way that we think about writing, and from this respect, I could go for a drive and I could, on my phone, pull up my AI recorder, and that creates the transcript. And because the material, I always say you are the message. So honestly, the material is kind of in there, the stories, the examples, and a lot of stories in the book. And is all there. So it's just a matter of laying it out. I mean, I had particular fun with chapter 10, which is on lawlessness. I have long, blathered incessantly about this correlation between what I saw in narcissistic individuals and culture, and that I knew intuitively that there was a connection to the breakdown of the family and this fragmentation and this fatherless epidemic that was contributing, and if not just contributing, was part of the primary bedrock that was part of the lawless culture that we see today, where we light everything on fire and break it and cut it and do whatever else we do to it and call that a protest. Praise the Lord. I knew that there was a connection in the ongoing diminishing of conscience and fatherlessness. So it wasn't a stretch, but I would talk about it like in snatches here and there, but I never really just tried to lay the whole thing out. And so that's what I would do. I would get in the car, I would go for a drive, miss all my turns because I was so involved in talking to my phone. I mean, I was watching the road. I wasn't like looking at my phone, but I was just talking to my phone and kind of laying out the chapter. And the beauty of the AI part would be, when you speak, you've read people's books that I've read people's books that sound just like they're talking, and essentially, in some rough form, they've gathered somebody has gathered, let's say, a series of messages that they did on a particular topic and thrown it into a book. But when I read a book, I can tell when I'm reading something that somebody is look sounds like they're saying at a seminar versus something that they've actually put together and written. It's just different. And so, um, but there was this medium in between that this I listened to this one prophet and he started talking about the way we write books today. Now, with AI, you can have degrees of writing. I'm sure there's a lot of writing today that is not original, okay? But when you look at AI as an editor, and when you look at like ChatGPT, for example, I would tell it, here's my parameters. You must keep my language. You must keep my tone. You are allowed to reorganize things in a way that make it coherent. In other words, when I'm talking and telling the story, I may start off with part A over here. I'm on A track. And I go to B track. And then I come back later back to this topic I was thinking about on A track, or this thread, if you will. And there might be several threads in the whole thing that I'm laying out verbally. I'm a verbal processor, so that's how that works for me. And so I'm laying things out. And what my wife would do when she was the one editing was she would take the part down here where you start talking about A again and bring it back up here where it belongs. You know what I mean? That's essentially what it would do. And then you still had to read it because sometimes it wanted to put a word in or shorten something. And I don't know how its brain works when you're telling it to keep your tone, keep your verbiage, but also make it excuse me, it's time to have a V8 or something. When you're telling it to basically make it flow logically, it's making decisions about that editing process. Okay. How is that again? There you go. So you're still reading it. So the final read for me, honestly, was when I was doing the audiobook, because the process of writing it. So let me go back and just finish the statement I was making so that I can finish one thing. So you still have to go back and read and see what it's done. And if it's used a different word in a way of trying to be concise, or whatever, or it's said something more awkwardly than you would say it, um, then you change it, and then inevitably when I would be in a chapter that I had spoken, I would think of an example of a story and I would add that story in. So that's why I said a lot of it really is there's still a lot of keyboard in it, but it makes the process a much faster when I could get the story out. And that's what I was going. I do rabbit trails, by the way, and I go back to them and I connect them. What I would tell my students when it came to writing, or anybody who was writing, get the story on the page and don't edit in your brain. If you think too much about what you're writing, you will never write. So I would tell them, just do it, just write. Well, we could go back and fix it. We can work on characterization. We can look at different parts of the way this thing is structured, and we can do things to tweak this, whatever. So inevitably, even when I would talk about something and create a chapter that way, when I would go back through and read it, I would say um, things like, okay, this is just me defining things. I really need to connect it to somebody's story. And I would put the story in and I would type that part in. So you're doing that. And then my final edit. So in the whole process of writing and doing this whole thing in 30 days was like, I mean, I would go out for a while, go meet somebody for coffee, hang out for an hour and come back in here. You know what I mean? And so, but it was a challenge that I felt like the Lord put in front of me and I needed to do it because it was about teaching me some things about how to actually write something quicker and better and use tools that actually make it easier. So like I have like two different grammar checkers, okay? And one is better than the other in some ways, ProWrite and then Grammarly. And the AI one, ProWrite, is kind of looking at not just your grammar, but it's looking at how often you use certain phrases or how often you're using passive voice. Sometimes I remember like with academic writing is all passive voice. So every time Grammarly would say passive voice, I just go boop, click, click, trashing their edits. Boom, 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 boom. And so what that gives you an opportunity to do is it's going to highlight some things that it sees as a pattern, right? But but you know what you want, and so sometimes you just X out. Okay, I don't accept the edit, or other times you're like, you know what? Let me see how you would rephrase this if you were trying to do this not as a passive statement, but more active. So it takes your words that are still your words, but makes it active. We do that all the time when we teach students how to write, how to say something in an active voice versus, passive voice. The action happening to you versus you talking about the action itself. And so, at any rate, so you have decisions like that that you make. And so my final edit was when I did the audiobook, because after all is said and done, you've gone into the car, you've written your chapter, you've come back in and written things into it. You have the things in it the way you want it. It's been through the editor in the sense that it's kind of taken what my wife would do and spent hours of doing and done it for you, and been through grammar checkers and whatnot. There's still the possibility that you could have a word in there that doesn't make sense, or it did something. So when I would read, typically old school, this is like I'm talking about AI today, and I wasn't going to, but I am now. So old school, you'd be doing this in GarageBand, right? Every time you screwed up, you'd go back to where you screwed up and start recording again until you screwed up again and go keep doing that. New school, in the AI software, I used a script when I did the audio part. And then I used another AI program to check for issues in terms of levels and to assign the levels that I wanted that Audible needed for Audible to accept the file. I didn't know I needed that second program until I started doing it and trying to put it in Audible. So part of what I really wanted in all this is I wanted to engage, and I like to have about 10 learning curves going at once. And the steeper and more profound they are, the better. Um so when you're reading and you stop, the beauty of AI is, if you even in doing an Audible book, is you stop. I read the line. So, like, let's say I'm going to read this line on my screen over here, or I'm going to read this line from the book. How about that? All right. So this is from Zach Preston. As a divorced father, free. You see, I said free instead of three. So then what I would do is stop. As a divorced father of three, I highly recommend The Absent Man. And so when I would get done with that, when I've read the whole thing, I stopped and paused and started reading again every time I screwed up. The AI would automatically find all the places where I did that, and it would suggest the edit or not, and you could choose whether. What it's editing for is actually clarity. So sometimes it would want to remove a sentence from what I was saying, and I'd be like, "Oh no, that stays." However, it also found the places where there were pauses and gaps and where you reread something. And then what I would do is, you in the text on the screen, you just it'll already be there. Do you want to take out that extra sentence? Check mark. So you edit the text and it edits the audio for you. That was kind of fun, because it means that you can find the glitches and the pauses and the things. It's already finding them for you. It knows that you did this. It knows something about you. So, it probably knows more than I want. I probably remembered everything I said and reported it to the government. Not this government, the shadow. Anyway, All right, so I'm gonna go back to this, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the process 'cause it's very interesting. So the audiobook was my final edit. As I'm reading through, if there was a problem, I would hit pause, fix it, and then reread it, and then let the audio and let the software fix it later when I was when I wanted it to be an audio file that didn't have any mistakes in it. And I wanted to do an author read version of the Audible book. All right, so this is Zach Preston. I'm going to read that first sentence again. As a divorced father of three, I highly recommend The Absent Man. Dr. Scott Infante speaks to the deepest wounds of the heart and what God is doing in this hour, turning us back to the true Father. This book brings healing to fractured identity and offers hope for restoration in family and faith. It impacted my life deeply. I believe it will do the same for you. It was fun. What I did for my readers was I gave them some sample chapters. I wanted some that kind of introduced the topic of fatherlessness. I wanted some that got into the faces of fatherlessness, what it looked like. And then I always included the lawless chapter because I thought it was so much fun. And Zach was an awesome because he was being really impacted, and he's like, "This is some of the best writing in these certain places like that I've ever seen." It's like this is like really good, and so he was very affirming, and I enjoyed that. And then here's what messed with me. So in a lot of the stories that I told, like let's say for example, first marriage. At 61, much grace down the road, a better perspective of my own brokenness, having gone through all the rage, all the forgiveness multiple times. The way that I would tell the story is much different than if I would have written it when I was 45. At 45, you would have gotten all the rage and you would have gotten every gory detail of the divorce. And I would have laid it out and been like, man, yeah, yeah, you know. And you would have thought that you were reading something by somebody that was kind of angry, which would be really inappropriate for this kind of a book. At age 61, I know I don't look a day over 40, but I could look at it and look at myself, and I could talk about it in a way where I'm not still living in reaction to something. I'm not still being triggered for the most part. Doesn't mean I never do, but it's like when you've had healing in your heart, then you know that you've had it when the trigger doesn't sting, and where the trigger doesn't like just make you go, how is that again? So it's much different and a much better time to write it. And so when I got to the end, it was all done. I said, I never really talked about myself as a divorced father because it's one of the biggest assaults on our identity as a father. And, as adults, adults who have grown adults for children, we all don't have the perfect Christian family background with, beautiful relationships with all of our children. Most of the people that I talk to, there are troubled relationships in the family. There's prodigals, there's relationships that have had a lot of stuff in them, a lot of hurt, a lot of, whatever. A lot of that is the product of what happens in divorce and what happens to children in divorce and what they get from both sides that's very destructive and not helpful. Notice I said both sides. And, and I wanted to talk about narcissism as a I put a lot of things on continuums and they work because this is in my example. When you're in college and you read the abnormal psych book, right? You're like, oh God, I got that. I'm part of that. I've got a little bit of that in me. Oh, shoot, I've got some of that. And you walk away from abnormal psych thinking, oh my gosh, I have a little. Well, yes, we do. Because continuums allow us to talk about brokenness and things that have gone wrong and places that we've been hurt and degrees of mental illness that we step into. If I'm a 2 on the continuum, it doesn't mean I'm fully, antisocial personality, but it means I might have some traits. Does that make sense? And so continuums allow us to talk about things in ways that it puts everybody in the same boat, and it finds the common thread that everybody shares. And so when you can graciously lay things out in that way where we all see a piece of ourself, and we see that, it's like 10 perfect drinking glasses. I love the analogy. You drop them all from the same height, they break differently. It's easier to judge a broken glass when you don't see how you're in it too. But when you look at the commonalities, the basic kind of wounds to the heart, abandonment, rejection, shame, all those kind of things, right? When you look at those, they're all the same core stuff. It's the things that happen, and the things that happen, and the way that things get tweaked in various equations, how much more tweaking in a particular arena would it take for me to end up somewhere else on a continuum? And so you always have to do it as there go I, right? You're looking at something, if you're going to name it in somebody else, you got to name it in yourself. And so that's the kind of vulnerability that I wanted to bring to the work. And so that's what made the conversation about lawlessness very interesting for me, and about narcissism in particular. Um, Looking at the culture and looking at us as individuals. And so what I had not done, which I started to say about 25 minutes ago, was I had not written about myself as a divorced father. And I was like, I had a friend ask me recently, I've been having this thought about something about me that I feel like it's like an insight into why I'm triggered in this place. And I'm wondering if it's God. I'm like, dude, if it doesn't kill, steal, or destroy, and I'm one with Jesus, then whatever's in there is God. In other words, if I'm one with Jesus and I have something ruminating in me, whether it's to go visit this person, whether it's to send something over here, whether it's to stop by this place on the way home, whether it's an insight into some part of me that's been rolling around, or somebody I need to forgive and I keep seeing their face, okay, you can trust that that's God. That makes it real simple for me. And so, why did I tell you that? Oh yeah. So at any rate, I really did forget why I told you that. I forget. I'll come back around to it. But so I wanted to do this. I didn't do the chapter on divorce fathers because I realized, oh, that's why I was telling you. Um, what was ruminating in me was this idea that you didn't write about that. You didn't talk about that. You didn't you didn't talk about that. And I'm like, and it's kind of there. And I thought, I'm gonna have to add a chapter. I'm going to have to add a chapter, another appendix. There is an appendix in the book that talks about the two things that really, really healed a lot, helped me in my relationship with the Father. One was engaging with the unseen real and having encounters with Jesus. The other is journaling. And I talk about those in Appendix 1. Appendix 2 is divorce dads. There is, it has its own brand of shame. It has its own brand of stuff that really messes with you. And it also has its own brand of challenge in terms of who you want to be. At 61, I can say something a little bit differently about that, where I didn't handle things so well when I was in uncharted territory myself. And so the grace place at this age is and to be able to say something to a divorced dad who's younger is, okay, here's one thing that I would say to you. Who do you want to be? And what are you going to do with the injustices and all the places of unforgiveness and the things that you have to forgive over and over and over again? And what are you going to do with the shame that's impacting you, that has a veil over you about who you are as a father? Because that doesn't define you as a father. The enemy wants to define you as a father as a failure because it's one of the biggest senses of failure that a man can carry. Okay. And so the enemy wars on that one with divorced dads. It's profoundly shameful in terms of what it means in the culture, how you get relegated to being, essentially a paycheck and a visitor overnight. And it's just a lot to it. And so I had to write that chapter, so I did. That's appendix 2. All right, let me continue with this so I can wrap this. All right, so this is Mac Tucker, one of my favorite pastor people. Dr. Scott Infante pulls back the curtain on his life to reveal how our Heavenly Father graciously heals the wounds only a father can create. Through raw personal stories, he shows how God leads us into truth, breaks the cords of lies that keep us bound. His years in the high school classroom give him unique insight into how father wounds manifest in the lives of the next generation. Dr. Scott knows this subject deeply and walks in it with authority. Whether you're carrying the pain of a father wound or you're a father in need of healing, the absent man offers real answers and a path to freedom. I tried to get different people, like for example, my he's my best friend. Um he's a local person that I've come to know and love, and he's a pastor as well, but he wrote the foreword. His name is Jeremy Clanton. But he has a different thing that he brings. I wanted somebody that was going to write a forward to this that had something else that carried, and he carries that. He's being healed, but the orphan spirit is a thing that he's very familiar with. So I thought, okay, let's talk about that. So I wanted to make sure that we were talking about various things in different places. There's a whole chapter called Fatherless Daughters. And my wife's best friend, Miss Carla, we won't say her last name, Carla, wink, wink. Okay. Told her story. And I put her story in just the way she told it. I didn't edit much. I mean, a tweak here and there, minor, but I let her tell the story. And she also prays for daughters of who have father issues. And she talks about an encounter she had in heaven with the father. So very, very powerful. So, and I was one of those chapters. I'm like, really? I talk about the father's daughter being a minister. I need a father. I need a daughter. Is that a problem? Father. Okay. Okay. I am going to read. I'm going to read my preface too. How about that? All right. So here's the preface. It's one of the last things I wrote. The Absent Man. When I first watched Top Gun Maverick, the long awaited sequel to the 1986 classic, I was stunned, flabbergasted, undone, and I couldn't immediately explain why. This was supposed to be just another high octane action film. So why did I cry multiple times? So why did it feel like something prophetic was pounding on the door of my soul? I love movies, especially the kind that bypass your intellect and punch straight through your defenses. The ones that bypass the logic and hit the heart with the truth bomb your brain might not have handled if it came in raw. Like a shot of whiskey, burning, sharp, unforgettable. And no, I don't drink whiskey. It just sounded cool to write it. But Maverick caught me completely off guard. That doesn't usually happen. Not in movies, they don't. I'm a pretty seasoned moviegoer, and yet I watched it 13 times. Many of those were at the theater. And I know something wrong with me. I need to take my medicine more often. Right? 13. That's a first for me. Something about it wouldn't let me go. So, what was it? And what does it have to do with this book? Everything. If I had to summarize the heart of that film in one sentence, the way I often challenge my high school students to boil down the theme in text, it would be this: Top Gun Maverick is a prophetic parable of modern fatherhood, a broken man seeking to be a father to a wounded son. And in the dynamic between Maverick and Rooster is the heartbreak of a generation waiting for the presence, blessing, and redemption. That's what The Absent Man is about. The fatherless epidemic, what it looks like, how it has shaped us personally, generationally, and culturally. It's about the divine ache for the Father's blessing, about heaven's master plan, God the Father loving us, pursuing us, and becoming the Father we've always needed, even if we never had one, even if we had never had it modeled in our earthly lives. Sorry. It's about his wild, relentless love, his unwavering intention to fulfill the prophecy of Malachi 4:6. And he will turn the hearts of the father to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. I pray you find in these pages not only in recognizing the wound, but in experiencing his healing embrace. Let me read that again. I pray you find yourself in these pages, not only in recognizing the wound, but in experiencing his healing embrace. I pray you encounter the destiny he's carved out for you uniquely and unmistakably for such a time as this. Blessings on steroids, Doc Scott. All right, now I'm going to read the introduction. That's going to be it. We're done with this podcast. Like, we're done. I'm telling you, we're done. Too many tangents. Introduction. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the fathers to their children. Fatherlessness as a phenomenon didn't happen overnight. Incremental change is powerful because it creeps up like a thief in the night. Its pace, deliberate, unnoticed until it's too late. It morphs landscapes bit by bit, reshaping the world in subtle, insidious ways. To the blithely unaware, only in retrospect do they pause and think, things didn't used to be this way. I don't know what happened. When Kairos time abruptly interrupts Chronos, chaos, holy or unholy, accelerates or shatters that incremental shift. This seems to be the story of fatherlessness. The epidemic is far from benign. It's part of a greater diabolical plan to splinter, fragment, and ultimately obliterate a sacred institution of heaven on earth, the family unit. Hell employs both incremental erosion and seizes Kairos moments in history, leveraging sudden cataclysmic cultural shifts, some masked as industrial or technological progress, others cloaked in individual freedom. My father loved to drive, always taking the long way, the scenic route to nowhere special. I'm pretty sure we were on one of those winding drives, his hands casually gripping the steering wheel of his latest luxury car, tapping his cigarette in the cracked window, when he asked the question that cracked my world wide open. I was 14, maybe 15. Time blurs when I look back, memories filed by feeling, not dates. Frustration colored his voice, a blend of exasperation and deep curiosity. Then, in a quiet moment, as if the air itself held its breath, he asked, what's the single most painful event that you can remember really hurting you? Without a pause, no filter, I blurted, "The day my dad," referring to my biological father, "walked out on me when I was 5." The truth hit like a hammer, stunning us both. We sat there, its weight filling the car, shattering yet straightforward. "That makes total sense," my dad said, his face a mix of relief and sorrow, as if he'd glimpsed the root of my chaos. For my stepfather, the man who adopted me and loved me, to hear his adopted son name that wound, the abandonment by a father of origin, could have been a sting. It was a scar I couldn't heal, a gash that had built walls around my heart, walls I didn't even know were there. I don't recall if he asked how it shaped me, but if he did, I'd have said, it told me I didn't matter. That wound wasn't just mine. It's a quiet epidemic, a father wound carved into the hearts of kids like the cracks in a foundation, collapsing under the weight of bottomless pit longings unfulfilled. When fathers, I've learned how to mute the mic. I'm back. When fathers walk away, literally or metaphorically, through trauma, neglect, broken life, circumstances, emotional unavailability, or ineptness, they leave behind more than broken families. They seed a hunger for validation, a desperate need to prove worth in a world that feels indifferent. That hunger often festers, twisting into narcissism, a mask of self obsession worn to hide the ache of insignificance. It's no coincidence that our society, unhinged from the bedrock of stable, loving families with deep roots, births fragile egos chasing the fleeting likes of social media posts, crippling porn induced isolation, depression on steroids, and rampant anxiety. My father's absence didn't just shape me, it broke me. This book is about that wound, mine, yours, ours, the very linchpin underpinning the brokenness in a culture that has failed to love God, self, and others rightly. In the quiet corners of the world, a wound festers, one so deep and pervasive it has become the defining ache of our generation: fatherlessness. It's not merely the absence of physical presence in the home. However, those statistics alone are staggering, sorry. Millions of children grow up without father's voice, guidance, or embrace. It's also the epidemic of the present but absent dads, men who share a roof but not a heart, who provide materially but withhold the affirmation the child craves. This wound cuts across cultures, races, and economies, leaving behind a trail of lawlessness, violence, and a profound confusion of identity. We see it in the headlines, the eyes of the lost, and perhaps even in the mirror. I know this wound intimately. Weeks before my father walked out to chase a skirt at work, he would come home, open the old Lane furniture stereo console, drop the needle as it sputtered and cracked, finding its place on what became a familiar, ominous song, Release Me by Engelbert Humperdinck, 1967. The words, "Please release me, let me go. I don't love you anymore," still echoes through my mind, complete with the pit in my stomach. I was a bright 5-year-old, but one didn't have to be too bright to understand the cruel message my father was smacking my mother in the face with every night, detonating a bomb in my own heart. The ominous series of nightly serenades converged one night as my mother and I stood in the middle of the road watching his car disappear into the dimly lit street, sobs racking our chest, words I can't remember, punctuated by broken syllables eking through my cries. Whether through my journey or the countless stories I've heard, I see that fatherlessness is more than a social issue. It's a spiritual crisis undergirding the collapse of our culture. It's a cry that echoes through history, longing, a longing the human soul cannot outrun. At its core, this book is about that cry, focusing on the children, now adults, who carry the scars of abandonment, neglect, or abuse. It's about the men and women who grew up with narcissistic or emotionally unavailable fathers, whose souls fractured under the weight of betrayal. It's about the orphan spirit that whispers lies of shame, insecurity, and self reliance, a spirit the enemy exploits to keep us from our true inheritance. And it's about the God who hears that cry, a father who steps in to the silence, who runs to meet us when we return. The absent man comprises four parts, each a step toward healing and restoration. In part one, we explore the wound, how fatherhood has unraveled historically, and the faces of the fatherless and the soul fractures that result from broken fathers. Part two takes us on a search, wrestling with the pain of unanswered prayers and the false fathers we turn to when God feels, turn a page, it's really challenging, when God feels distant. Part three offers healing, revealing the true face of the Father, the true face of God as Father through Jesus Christ, and the process of spiritual reparenting. Finally, it looks to part four looks to restoration, how we can break generational cycles, reclaiming identity, and become the fathers and mothers this world so deeply needs. This is not a book of simple answers or quick fixes. It's a journey through the ache and into the arms of the Father who never abandoned us. As you turn these pages, I pray you will find both understanding and hope, a, a hope rooted in the promise that God is still the Father we need. He has not left us as orphans. He is calling us home. Doc Scott. So anyway, I'll end it with that. But I just wanted to give you guys a little preview. Obviously, talk about the process of writing, which was fun. It was a very fun experiment, one that God orchestrated at a very unique time for me, and so I'm excited about what's that it's coming out, and you might have to wait a few days for the Audible part. But anyway, that's it. So I love your feedback. I love reading things, whatever, however that works. I love the interaction. So blessings.